Hi, I'm Keith Bell, and I'm here to talk to you about 9 important rules in developing and communicating an unfunded requirement. I like to refer to an unfunded requirement as too much want and not enough wallet. You may relate to this with even your own personal finances. You often have to make choices or prioritize between things you want or need, depending on how much money you have. The same goes for our U.S. Air Force. We prioritize our Air Force requirements through an unfunded requirements process review. Now, the brief video you just watched provides a vivid reflection that the work we do as financial managers is vital in supporting the needs of our warfighters. To help illustrate these important rules, we will occasionally refer to an actual Air Force readiness requirement for the dismounted hot stick. Now, the hot stick is an extension tool that creates an additional 10 to 12 feet of space between the explosive ordnance disposal technician and an IED, or improvised explosive device. While not all unfunded requirements will have this direct effect on our mission or the safety of our airmen, this example does remind us that unfunded requirements are primarily about mission impact and only secondarily about dollars. So today we're going to talk about some of the key rules you should follow to give you the best chance for success in getting funding for an unfunded requirement. Let's get started. The first rule we're going to talk about is setting up an effective work environment to allow you to be successful in advocating unfunded requirements. So rule 1 is, as financial managers, you must build strong and trusting relationships with your functional counterparts. Your functionals are the experts on the program or requirement. We're primarily responsible for the dollars, but it's an important team sport. If the only time you contact them is to transmit a tasking or pull funding, they most likely won't view you as a partner. It takes time, as building any relationship takes time, but it's way worth it. If you do this, you will build trust with them and gain the benefit of greater transparency in their requirements. This will typically result in unfunded requirements justification narratives that reflect hard and core mission results. So get to know the people you work with that cover the programs. Go out to lunch, get to know them. It makes for a much more fun and productive work relationship. And by the way, it will also help in a big way in achieving rule number 2. Since you will be required to articulate the unfunded requirement in resource management meetings, you have to understand what the requirement is. Therefore, rule 2 is you need to work with your functional counterpart to help you know the requirement and to become the smartest one at the table. It's not enough for a financial manager to know how much the unfunded requirement costs. You also need to know what the requirement is and defend it to senior leaders. Now, to get well prepared, you should come armed to answer a few questions on every unfunded requirement. What is it? Why do you need it? When do you need it? How many or how much are you buying? Or are there other less expensive options or alternatives to achieve the same mission effect? These are all questions you should ask. Why is this important? Whoever is best prepared in the meetings that determine funding priorities gains an advantage. If you care enough to know all you can know about your requirement and others don't, you will more likely be the winner. Now, while I just mentioned that it wasn't enough for financial managers to just know about the dollars, rule 3 is very important. Resource managers must know about the dollars. This is where you are uniquely qualified to contribute to senior leader decision making. Here are some of the costs and other issues you must understand. Number 1, you must know the proper appropriation and program element for the requirement. Asking for funding in the wrong appropriation could potentially create a violation of appropriation law. Number 2, you should also understand how the cost was derived. Do your analysis. Get behind, around, and under the numbers. Break the requirement into its pieces and understand what's driving the total costs. Number 3, you should also know if multiple vendors provide the product and if we are getting it at the best price. Number 4, you should ask the functional expert to determine if there are alternative methods of achieving the mission requirement. While there might not be many or any alternatives for this hot stick, most requirements can be filled by several and maybe lower cost options. And 5, once you have a solid cost for the requirement and socialize it with decision makers, that number will stick with them. If later you find out the number was wrong, you risk losing the requirement and some of your credibility as a financial manager. So if you are ready to publicize the cost, make sure it's right. Here's another important rule on the dollars. Rule number 4 is, don't ask for the same money twice. Now what does that mean? On occasion, an installation commander may move money out of a funded program so they can meet a new emergent requirement in another area. When that occurs, it may appear you now have an unfunded requirement in the program where you pulled the money out. Kind of makes sense. I mean, the money's gone from that program, but it's not an unfunded requirement in that area. If you move money from a funded program to a new requirement and then ask for the money to backfill what you took out, then you essentially ask for the same money twice for that requirement. Once when it was originally funded, and now again. Bottom line, if a new requirement is critical to the mission or essential to the life and safety of airmen, and your commander decided it was important enough to realign dollars to it, then it should be able to stand on its own as an unfunded requirement. The hot stick provides a compelling mission function and saves lives. It's easy to understand. Many of the unfunded requirements you will deal with won't have as obvious a role in supporting the mission. So Rule 5 emphasizes that you understand why the requirement is important and understand the mission impacts if it's not funded. Here's a couple of things to focus on. 1. You must be able to describe how this helps us fly, fight and win, and support our airmen. Link it to the mission. Number 2, it's also helpful to know if it's linked to other programs. Most of the activities we accomplish in the Air Force pull multiple pieces together to achieve the result we desire. Make sure you understand those connections. When your senior leaders evaluate funding priorities, they will view those requirements from a whole perspective. Number 3, be prepared to answer the question, what won't we be able to do if we don't get these resources? This full understanding is even more critical today as we wrestle with very constrained budgets. Only the most important requirements will survive today. In the end, the decisions that are made to fund or not fund a requirement will be a choice of what's most important and how well you describe it. You have to have a story that matters. And even if you have a compelling impact for your requirement, it might not necessarily mean you'll get the dollars. You will be competing against other important requirements from across your installation. So Rule 6 is, know your competition. Here's a couple of points to consider. Number 1, if you bring a large cost unfunded requirement forward, funding your requirement might push a number of lower cost but well-deserving requirements below the funding line. Commanders won't typically do that since the sum of all of those other requirements might have more impact than your one requirement. So the bottom line is, if you can break your requirement into pieces, you might be able to get part of it funded versus a larger amount. Number 2, if you can link with other requirements and drive down costs, you should do so. For example, if you can combine with others and get a quantity discount for similar items, it will save dollars and send a message to decision makers that the team is working together to drive down costs. If you only listen to one rule, this is the most important one. Rule 7, you must communicate to win. Your ability to prepare and articulate a clear and understandable unfunded requirement will be the key difference between winning and losing. Senior leaders make decisions based on what they know and understand. It's your responsibility to make that happen. Here's a few suggestions to help you. Number 1, know your audience. They are not resource managers. Focus on defining the requirement in mission language and capability it provides. Number 2, be crisp and concise. Less is more when you are writing and talking. It takes more time to write and speak this way, so prepare to invest the time you need to do this. It will pay off. Number 3, the total cost of the requirement must be clear, but don't build to watch. You don't want your decision makers to get bogged down in how you got to the number. Stick to the major cost drivers. And in the end, you can spend enormous amounts of time dissecting and understanding the issue and analyzing the cost. But if you don't communicate the requirement well, it will all be wasted time. Now, rule number 8 is map out your game plan which is developing a few strategies to improve your chances at winning. Number 1, do not bring too many unfunded requirements forward. Leaders will assume you didn't make any hard choices, and they will likely dismiss your issues as not being serious. Only the most important requirements should come forward for funding. Number 2, pre-brief your leadership. If it's the first time they hear about a requirement, it's less likely to be fully understood or approved. Number 3, include photos of the requirement. The old saying that a picture is worth 1,000 words is true. And number 4, ask a more senior colleague to take a look at your unfunded requirement. That person has been through this rodeo before, so call on their experience before you get to prime time. We're now on to Rule 9, and we've saved a really important rule for last. You have to be able to execute the dollars if you put in an unfunded requirement. Sometimes we get so caught up in the process of developing and writing the unfunded requirement that we forget to ensure we have to have a plan to be able to spend the dollars before the end of the fiscal year. Don't forget to do your homework here. You might even include the vehicle or contract you plan to use to get it obligated in your unfunded requirement justification. It's an effective means of telling your commander that you're ready now if he gives you the funding. Now the other side of that coin is that if your senior leaders approve your requirement and then you can't execute the dollars, you will impact your credibility and have a tougher time getting dollars at the next opportunity. People tend to have long memories when scarce resources are wasted. We've come to the end, and that's a lot of info on unfunded requirements over a short time, but fortunately you can review this video as often as you need. In summary, here's a list of what we talked about as keys in developing and presenting an unfunded requirement and winning in this important competition for resources to fund our mission and the airmen that serve our Air Force. Thanks for watching, and good luck.